Hello, and welcome to a very special video recording of the Jesuitical podcast. I'm Ashley McKinless with my co-host Zach Davis, and today we are excited to bring you a conversation with Father Greg Boyle.
Greg Boyle is someone who needs no introduction, but if you haven't heard of him, just Google his name. There's a billion things you can find about him. But he is the founder of Homeboy Industries, which is the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-entry program in the world. And Father Greg is not only famous for that, but he just consistently drops a lot of wisdom bombs, I would say.
Yes, you probably know his most famous book, Tattoos on the Heart. He is now out with his third book, and it is called The Whole Language: The Power of Extravagant Tenderness. So we talked to Father Greg about his new book, but also about his own spiritual journey, his experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot more.
Yeah, so stick around for our conversation with Father Greg Boyle.
Father Greg Boyle is a Jesuit priest, the founder of Homeboy Industries, and the author of the forthcoming book, The Whole Language: The Power of Extravagant Tenderness. Welcome to Jesuitical, Father Boyle.
It is great to be with all of you.
No, and it's great to see you. I know this is maybe a bit of a cliche place to start, but this is, I feel like, how most small talk happens now when we're reconnecting with people after the past year and a half. But wondering if we could start with what the past year and a half has been like for you. You have this line in the introduction to your new book. For every one of us, the pandemic didn't just alter plans, it also torpedoed identity. Who am I, after all, if how I am relational gets toppled? And you're someone who is obviously doing a lot of in-person ministry, and you talk all the time about how Homeboy Industries is so relational and incarnational. And I don't know about you, but Zoom and Skype are among the least incarnational things I think I can think of. So what was that? If you could maybe explain for our audience how important relationship and in-person things were before the pandemic, and then how that's changed in the past year and a half.
Well, so part of my life is to be here in my office where I am at the moment, and you're constantly seeing gang members walk in and they, tell me what's going on with their life, and so there's that. But I'm also in all these detention facilities, in all of them throughout Los Angeles County, where I celebrate the Eucharist on a rotating basis. That was shut down, and it mainly kind of still is. Occasionally there are places that open up, and then they close again just as quickly as they had opened. And then I'm out giving talks. So all that stuff is kind of what I do for a living.
Yeah. And
so that kind of stopped. So you had to, lean into the grief of it and try to figure out, now who am I? So, I mean, that's not a horrible thing. It's funny you mentioned Zoom, that's least relational, although I've had, a kind of the sort of quasi-Bible study with all these gang members every Tuesday night. And now we're moving into our second year every Tuesday night.
Over Zoom?
Yeah, and it's quite amazing. And then I had a group of professor friends of mine from all over the world, and we would read Brothers Karamazov and a variety of things. So, I mean, that wouldn't have happened were it not for the pandemic. So, I don't know.
Now, you mentioned the word grief, and I know that's probably like a quick shorthand, or you get there very quickly identifying that as grief. But I think for most people, it's sad, but grieving the loss of an identity, what's that like? I mean, the real hard work of it.
Yeah, I just came right now from burying my 250th young person who has died in, the streets. And his name was John. And so what are you to make of that? He left 7 kids behind. And so, it's difficult. And so you have to lean into this grief. And you want to make sure that grief doesn't leave you where it found you. And grief loosens you up so that you are freed for something else. Otherwise, we get stuck in the sadness, as you said, the sadness of it, and you stay there. And we're not meant to stay there. We ought not to settle for sadness. You want to hold out for the joy that's being offered no matter what, and no matter what's happened to you. So I think the time has been very instructional in that way, and illuminating, that it's led us to kind of really stay anchored in the luminous now, and because we were all freed from tasks and the typical ways that we identified ourselves. We just kind of didn't do it anymore for a prolonged period of time. And so we used muscles that were unfamiliar to us. And I think that was actually, in the end, kind of enlivening and helpful.
Yeah. So your books are chock full of stories about your conversations with homies, and they often, impart this amazing wisdom. And I'm wondering if you have any stories like that from the past year of ways that gang members have helped you through that grieving process and rebuilding relationships in the new context.
Well, at the beginning when we had PPE, and it was wear a mask and personal protection, and the homies were constantly doing that, texting me. We are your mask was what a guy had sent me from. He had been deported to Mexico, and then so they were all our own. Everybody, you felt personally protected in the sense that people held you, and they held you in mind, and they held you, kind of in a consciousness, even though we were apart. We were shut down like most people initially, and then the mayor deemed us a essential organization. So, we kind of reopened, and we staggered people, and we, checked temperature at the door and that kind of thing. But I remember I was sitting here in my mask, and a homie came in with an apron dusted with flour, and his name is Carlos. We call him Chamuco because he has two devil's horns on his forehead. And he came in, and I'd help him during the pandemic to fix his teeth, which were pretty awful. And he stood in front of my desk, and he said, "Hey, can I take my mask off and show you my grill?" Because he was wanted to thank me. And I said, "Sure." So he did, and big smile, and he really kind of exaggerated the smile. And then he looked at me and he said, "Not only did you pay for this smile, you are the reason I'm smiling." And I even before I could say anything, he said, "Hey, that's good. Write it down." And he and even though, and I'm writing it down, and for sure he just wanted to get in my next book, and he did. He opens the epilogue. He got in just under the wire.
Amazing.
But here at Homeboy, we always talk about laughing from the stomach, and the homies always talk about that. At Homeboy, we laugh from the stomach, which means that there's depth to it. It's not superficial. It really kind of is transformational kind of laughter. So, but that even happened, during this time, and hilarious memes. That was the other thing.
The meme sharing.
Oh my God, they would send me things that just made me howl, and one homie somewhere in the middle of the pandemic texted me. He said, "Can I finally take a shower, or do I have to just keep washing my hands?" I go, "Please take a shower."
Oh man. Now I imagine most of our listeners are very familiar with your work, and so I want you to just appreciate the situation we're in, where we're trying to pull something new out of you here. But I'm wondering if for those that aren't familiar, if you could just maybe kind of define this idea of kinship that's so essential to your ministry and the work at Homeboy.
Well, the kind of essential principles around here is that we belong to each other, and every single person is unshakably good. And so there is no need to sever belonging. There's no need to say you're in and you're out. One day you might be in, but you need to change your behavior. No, everybody's everybody belongs. So you try to create a community of kinship such that God might recognize it, and you try to um, announce this message that nobody is outside the circle of compassion. And so you're trying to obliterate once and for all the illusion that we're separate, that there's an us and a them, and we don't want that. Which is kind of a key, I think, to solving life as we know it. How can we really get to a place where we draw our family circle wider?
What does resistance look like? I imagine it sounds really nice, but I imagine oftentimes when people are met with good, they want to run away from it, and especially if you've got rival gang members coming in together, or just any old person. Like, what does resistance look like to that message typically?
Well, I mean, it's resistance is mainly outside of this community, probably. I mean, that's the nature of demonizing. So people will demonize gang members. I mean, and that was so much more pronounced in our first 10 years than in our last 20. But still, it's all part of people saying there are certain types of people who don't belong to us. And even now, given the polarizing times in which we live, I've never in my lifetime ever seen a more pronounced notion of us and them. So
then right now,
then don't you think politically, and it's how tribal we are, and so I mean, Homeboy wants to be the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in. So we don't want to just point stuff out. We'd also like to point the way. Here are Black, brown, Asian enemies, people who used to shoot at each other, and now they're making croissants together in the Homeboy Bakery. So that's kind of the idea. So how do we announce that message to the world? What if we stood against forgetting that we belong to each other?
You mentioned, the divisions, the us versus them. We even see that in the Catholic Church right now. And I'm wondering, if you can just unpack what the lessons you take from your work in relationship building and reconciliation, what the church could take from that.
Well, I don't think we really identify things very correctly, and that's part of the problem. So these folks are bad and these folks are good. These folks are correct and these folks are incorrect. These folks are faithful to the teaching of the church and these folks aren't. So the mark of an authentic disciple is joy and bravery. And so you can easily identify what lurks underneath most things by identifying fear and sadness. If the message is soaked with fear and laced with sadness, then you at least know that you're doing it incorrectly, which is probably nice to know. But if it's joyful and if it's brave and if it's take seriously what Jesus took seriously, inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. If it does all that stuff, then it stays close to the marrow of the gospel, and it's never afraid, and it's filled with joy. So, but I also think that people, we get stuck in moral outrage, and we shouldn't. We shouldn't settle for that. We should hold out for a moral compass, which is quite different. And so people get outraged all the time, and that's really a statement about themselves. It's really, you've allowed it to become about you if it's about being outraged. But once it's about moral compass, then it's about everyone belongs. Everyone belongs. And again, once you kind of start to say there are no exceptions to that, then you start to understand and see as God sees. Gang members have taught me that in 37 years, and I'm eternally grateful.
Now, there's moral outrage, I guess, can be like this barrier to, as you say, a moral compass or forgiveness or something like that. But also, I feel like, we're coming off a period of news where things can feel very overwhelming, I guess, and distant. And so I feel like a lot of people, I feel like this. My two options are either be morally outraged or just be more like apathy's not the right word, but like, well, I don't know what to do. I can't do anything about this. And so I'm not going to think about it. Is a moral compass an antidote to that sort of feeling towards despair as well?
Yeah, moral compass is more than forgiveness or reconciliation. Moral compass does what the homies always talk about here. How do we find the thorn underneath? So that's here people behave badly all the time. I can look out in my office and I can identify, several folks who are, can be difficult and have started fights. And it's because they're in pain. It has nothing to do with morality. Morality has never kept us moral. It's just kept us from each other. So that's essential, because obviously God doesn't share in our outrage. God only invites us to kinship and connection. How do you find the thorn underneath? How do you help each other? Obviously, people are in pain. It's like Jesus when he sees the guy having seizures, and he, like the whole crowd, thinks the guy is possessed by a demon, but he's not. He has epilepsy, and so that's kind of different. And it's important to name things correctly. Otherwise, you get stuck in moral outrage, which is just self-congratulatory. It feels good. It feels like it's on the right path, but it just isn't. It's a block to moral compass where we can get underneath. Around here, every gang member who works here as a senior staff knows that behavior is a language, and so they always want to know, well, what's that language speaking? What is that behavior indicating? They just fought right now. So what does that mean? And where is that coming from? And what wound and injury needs our attention? Now that is how God sees, rather than banishing people.
Yeah, so I thought of this experience when I was reading your book. I had a friend a couple years ago ask this question, which is one of the 10 questions that's always asked on Inside the Actors Studio. So it's like, what's your favorite word? What's your least favorite word? And then the last one is, if God exists and you make it to heaven, like, what is the first thing you want to hear God say to you? And I the immediate thing that popped into my head was "It's okay," which it felt weird. It was like it's kind of small and not exciting, but I think it kind of speaks to what you talk about the way it says something about the way I think God sees me, as I need to be justified. It's okay to be me. What you did is okay. But yeah, so I just thought about that. Have you ever had that question?
You're exactly right, because it addresses the thing that undergirds everything, which is our abiding sense that there's something wrong with us. And so then to have God say, it's okay, you're okay, because we just spend so much time utterly convinced that we aren't. And so how do we get to a place where we actually feel, the tender glance, and we feel the notice of God, and then we start to notice the notice of God in other people, and behold the one beholding you and smiling. Yet it'll probably be wordless when you encounter God at the end. It'll just be behold the one beholding you and smiling.
Was there a moment for you where that switched? you talk and write about, believing, like we have to stop believing in the gods that we kind of grew up believing in, and understand who God actually is. Is there a moment in your life where you felt that just kind of switch?
I think probably when I entered the Jesuits, I had kind of a sense of that has only grown, So I've never really fully bought the God that we were taught, you know.
How'd you
And
describe that God?
you know, as my friend Mirabai Starr says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. So there are those, I feel like I kind of in my own life, it became clear to me that God wasn't who people said God was, exacting, demanding, judging, eternally disappointed, shaking God's head at me. Can't you do anything right? I kind of early on, obviously I had that as a kid, everybody does. But I think one of the reasons why I joined the Jesuits was it wasn't my experience of God pretty early on. Now, I've spent almost 40 years walking with gang members, and they've made this so abundantly clear to me that I'm never tempted, you know, to believe in a wrathful God, an angry God, an eternally disappointed God. It just doesn't compute with my experience, and so I'm not tempted by that anymore, really. Um, but I would say that that's only deepened for me, and 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 it's disheartening and dispiriting sometimes that people still cling to a God who keeps wanting stuff from you instead of for you, and my joy, yours, your joy complete. There's no greater articulation what God wants for you than to be joyful, and it takes a lifetime to kind of see that anything other than joy is not on God's mind. Even to do good and avoid evil. I mean, the point of that is that you'll be joyful. If you love being loving. So it's not about a tally sheet at the end of your life. It's more about how can we get to joy more quickly.
You mentioned that that the homies and people you've been working with over the past 30 years have made that love abundantly clear to you. And something I learned in your book is that I believe your spiritual director is a former gang member or a homie. Um,
Yeah.
how when did that start, and how did that?
It's probably his name is Sergio, and I've known him since he was a little kid, and then he kind of evolved and grew and went to prison and got into recovery, and now he helps run a program in San Bernardino called God's Pantry, and so he's kind of been my spiritual guide for the last 5 years. So we email each other every morning, and he gets up impossibly early, and so do I. So, and lately, what we've done for the last couple of years, I guess, is we just get the readings that come to our email, the readings for the day, and then we'll kind of pray over them, and then we'll kind of shoot out some lines to each other, whoever gets there first, and then we kind of go back and forth, questions we might have or something that happened. So it's not like let's meet once a month. We do it every day, and it's quite wonderful.
It's a different model of spiritual direction, I think, than probably most of your
Yeah,
brother Jesuits are used to.
yeah, probably. But it's also mutual. It's not like come to the priest.
Yeah.
It's exquisitely mutual. There's no sense that one has the upper hand in the spiritual. And he's a true, authentic disciple that I look up to him.
Is there a way it's challenged you, or he's challenged you recently?
Well, I'd say yeah, because he's had to carry more than I've ever had to carry, and I got quite a number of years on him. So as always, I stand in awe at what he's had to carry, and because it colors and guides how he sees things. And he always talks to me about how do we make more room in our hearts for people, and that's kind of what he does every day. You get a sense that his heart becomes a place that's more spacious, and then suddenly more people can fit in it. And that's kind of the model, and the thing he talks about a lot that I try to do myself. You try to make room in your heart, because it's hard, because you want to win the argument, and you want to draw the lines when an open heart only wants to erase the lines.
Something I've really wanted to ask you is how you measure success. You're sort of looking back on this. How long has it been? 37 years since you started
No,
Homeboy?
well, 37 years since I've been working with gang members, but
Right.
33 Homeboy Industries.
So 37 years you've been working with gang members. Are y- are you measuring like success in terms of individuals or like overall like you know gang violence reduction in your neighborhood? Is it both? One thing that frustrates me as like a young adult working in the church is I kind of hear all the time like, well, ministry can't be measured by the same standards of success as like, the business world. And that frustrates me a lot of times because I think the church uses that as a crutch rather than an actual like spiritual, you know, it's in God's hands. Well, yeah, but it's also in ours. And you've obviously built this very successful ministry. And I'm wondering if how you've thought about that has shifted at all in the past 33 or 37 years.
Yeah, well, part of the thing is that Mother Teresa said we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. So at Homeboy, we are outcomes aware, but we're not outcomes driven.
Hmm.
What drives us, the air we breathe, the thing that we get our life from, is kind of a person-centered approach. It's really the person sitting in front of you today, in the luminous now, right at this second. And so then you stop caring about success. Oddly, if you're driven by success, then it's only about you, and you will burn out, and you will be depleted, oddly, if you're success driven. But if all you want to do is be relationally whole with people and connect to people, then it's eternally replenishing, which is what you want. And in the end, that's the only thing that makes progress. The thing that keeps us from moving forward is our own ego-centric, outcomes-driven, success-obsessed. That's what actually keeps us from making progress in terms of, all of us entering into the kinship of God with an exquisite mutuality. So we always think that it's funny how humans are. We want to kind of focus on something, and we want to address things head on, even success. Our goal is success, and good luck with that, because it doesn't actually make progress, because there's some things present that ought not to be. If your goal is success, it's about you, and it can't be. If your goal is success is to fix and rescue and save people, and it can't be. So it's an odd kind of thing. So because every social dilemma is about something else: homelessness, gang violence, everything, racism. It's all about something else. So the trick is to find the something else, and and to go where love has not yet arrived and love what you find, and
Hmm.
that makes progress. I mean, I guess progress, I'm just hearing myself say it now, is a word I like better than success,
Hmm.
because success is about me, but progress is about us.
Sure.
It can't hurt to have gotten $200 million from Mackenzie Scott, though.
20.
20, only
20.
20,
Oh,
$20
sorry,
million
20.
dollars.
I
Yeah.
had a homie come in and he said, hey, I hear Bozo's wife gave you $20 million. And I
Oh
said,
my God.
it was actually Bezos' ex, because Bozo doesn't have that kind of money.
Oh man. Well, congrats on that, by the
Yeah.
way. I think we want to move just real quick. We asked some of our listeners to submit some comments, and we're just going to try to move through these a little quickly, if you don't mind.
No problem.
So one from Denise, she asked, "What was one of your earliest experiences or encounters with feeling the presence of God, and how does that compare to a more recent experience?"
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about this when I was in high school. I used to, when I would go to the beach in Los Angeles, and I just, for me, the ocean was God, and it was so palpable. So a homie the other day, he just, and it was endless. He videoed, the water very close. He was on these rocks, and the water was coming up to the rocks, and it was so calm and it was so still, and it was kind of endless. It was like 10 minutes long, and I just looked at it, and I wrote him back. I said, the ocean is God. And I remember that was for me, a palpable experience of God being quiet and still and deep, and then, somehow you enter the stillness of God, and then you rest there. So it reclaimed something of almost 50 years ago when I joined the Jesuits, an abiding sense of what kind of God we have, quite apart from the notions, like loving and tender. But it was more about how, I don't know, how the entering the utter stillness of God, and being still in that presence. So
All right, here's another one, a little more practical from Mike. What would you say to young seminarians or lay ministers who are looking to get into prison ministry?
well, I met somebody who is involved in the Kairos retreats that go into prisons, and they have kind of a mantra that they say, listen, listen, love, love. And it's because people will go into a prison, and in their own insecurity, they'll want to yak at people and tell people things. But the key to ministry is, can you allow your heart to be altered by other people? Can you receive people, especially those who are on the margins, the widow, orphan, and the stranger? Can you allow yourself to be reached by them? So that the idea when you go into a prison is somehow, I'm going to go into a prison and I'm going to reach these guys. But there's another example of stuff is really about something else.
Yeah.
Can you go into a prison and allow yourself to be reached by them? And that feels passive, but it's hugely of the gospel to do such a thing.
So Alexander's, I think, looking to stir the pot a little bit. What are some of the criticisms you get from people in the church about your work?
I don't think I really get criticisms anymore from church. I mean, they did in the early days. There would be, maybe, just as the majority of people demonized the gang members, so it was a short hop to demonize the person who helped gang members. So everybody kind of engaged in that. I don't know. In terms of church, sometimes I've been outspoken on wanting us to be more connected to the marrow of the gospel, and that's always going to bump into the church. And
Ironically,
it
yeah.
makes me sad that that's the case. Again, everything's about something else. If you want to re-energize the church, quit talking about Catholic and talk about gospel.
Hmm.
It's funny that sometimes the bishops will say, people are confused, or people have contempt for the gospel. I go, no, they don't. They're longing for it. They're thirsty for it. They're hungry for somebody to actually, speak the gospel, to talk about the liberation that's in it. But instead, it's, I don't know, who can go to communion, or things like that. It's like, no, no, no. People aren't contemptuous of the gospel. They're just waiting for you to get around to preaching it.
Hmm.
All right, so that's it for the Facebook comments. We did want to, before we let you go, give you a chance to talk about your new book.
Help you sell some copies. Yeah.
So I guess we want to know why this book now. You've written about kinship before, compassion, and now this one is about tenderness. Why did you think it was important to get that message out there now?
Well, I wish I could say there was a rhyme or a reason, but not so much. I mean, it's I promised them a third book, and so a lot of it is just sort of what's on my mind at the moment. And I feel like kind of the answer is to somehow embrace a mystical view that tries to see as best we can, as God does, without fear and without sadness. And the key to me was tenderness. Every gang member who I see right now, they're all mad dogging me because I have a sign on my door that says, I'm on a podcast, and they're wondering why I'm not paying attention to them. But every gang member that walks through our doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. So tenderness is really the fullness of mystical love, because otherwise love stays in your head or in the air or even in your heart. But unless it becomes tender, there is no connective tissue, and that's what you need. You need this to be connective. And so it just felt clear to me that we ought to speak the whole language, have a fluency in a kind of a mystical way of living, where we really choose to be in the world who God is, compassionate, loving, and kind. And that's where the joy is. So it's not a grim duty to follow, the invitation. It's in fact where the joy is. So, so I don't know if there was any timing to it. I mean, the fact that I was, we were in this pandemic, it allowed me to write in a way that I didn't have to go take a sabbatical to do it. So,
Yeah. Are there? To me, it seemed like it was a much more mystical book. Do you feel like that is you are becoming more like? Are you thinking more about mysticism and who God is as you go on in years?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't want to pretend that I'm a mystic, but I love the mystics, and they cut through stuff. Even Ignatius in his early days, was scrupulous and tormented, and then he kind of went. Once he knew the God of love, he fired all the other gods, and mystics all have that experience.
So is that a young person thing then? Is it like is it so age driven? Like I don't know, or is it more where you're at in the process?
Are you saying I'm old?
I would not dare to suggest that, but I think I'm young, and I think I've probably got some gods I still need to fire.
We all have gods that we need to fire, but find me a mystic who believes in hell, and I will think you have not located a mystic. It's sort of how it works. Julian of Norwich and John of the Cross and all these folks, Ignatius, at the end, they kind of have a sense of the God of love, and that it becomes, positions are untenable. Like Julian would say, I guess there's a hell, but it's other mystics will say, I guess there's a hell, but I think it's empty. But she would say, maybe there's the God is wrathful and angry, but I've never seen that. I don't know that God. Mm. So it's the mystical certainty that says, no, this is the God I know, and that other God, I don't know, is foreign to my experience, which is nice. That's the whole point of mystics. We all want to become them, hopefully, before we check out.
Well, yeah. I feel like a lot of people maybe, like, in theory want to become one, but see it as this inaccessible thing that, you would have to go on retreat for a few years or live alone in a cell to achieve.
Be around a lot of church people for a long time.
But, like, clearly, I think you probably work more than 9 to 5. So what advice would you give for someone who has a 9 to 5 job and wants to become a mystic?
We always think it's very rarefied air, but it isn't. Jesus was a mystic, and obviously, if we want to follow with integrity, then we're being invited to be a mystic. And so that's the hope, that we can embrace the same things that mattered to Jesus. And it's really as simple as that. It's not, go to a monastery, though there's nothing wrong with that. But we think that's, we all know mystics who aren't in monasteries. And people who are just, they know how to cherish with every breath they take. And it comes from a deep and abiding sense of being cherished. And that's the mystical view. And that changes. Then you never get stuck in moral outrage. You move quickly to a moral compass that says we all belong to each other.
Father Greg, thank you so much. We do have one final question for you, and we ask this of all our guests. If you could canonize one person, living or dead, Catholic or not, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
I don't know, because there are too many, but I would say this kid, Sergio, just, I say kid, he's not a kid anymore, but he's a holy man. And mainly because he's fearless in wanting to have God kind of marinate everything that he does or thinks or touches. And it's a constant thing. And I admire his holiness. And that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Amen. Well, I wish you luck in the growing up. Thank you so much for taking the time today and for all you've done in your life and for this Jesuit world too. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great being with all of you.
All right. Thanks so much.
Stay well.
Hey, thanks for watching our conversation with Father Greg Boyle. If you want more videos like this, make sure you subscribe and like this video. Subscribe to the channel. I asked you to earlier, and if you didn't already, do it now. Now is the time to do that. And thanks again for listening.
And if you want more Jesuitical interviews, you can subscribe to Jesuitical wherever you get your favorite podcasts.